Our second lesson this morning comes to us again from the Gospel of Luke, this time chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You've given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In the AMC drama Breaking Bad, we meet the character Saul Goodman. Saul is a criminal defense attorney for some of the biggest names in the Albuquerque, New Mexico drug trade. Also, his name isn't really Saul Goodman. In his life before Saul Goodman, he had been Jimmy McGill, small-time con man turned lawyer who'd worked his way from the mailroom of his brother's law firm to his own solo practice. Though he has, in theory, gone legit, Jimmy still has a reputation for shadiness, a reputation that is entirely well-deserved. His methods are unorthodox, to say the least, but his heart is usually in the right place, and he has a soft spot for the downtrodden. If a granny is being scammed by her grandchildren, or a hard-working hustler has been wrongly accused, Jimmy is there. And he isn't above bending or even breaking the rules in order to see justice done for his low-rent clientele. Jimmy's older brother, Chuck, is in every way Jimmy's opposite. He is a partner in that prestigious Albuquerque law firm where Jimmy had once worked in the mailroom. He is a brilliant man who holds himself and others to the highest of standards. Chuck's deep, abiding loyalty is to the law. He maintains an unyielding belief that one must follow the rules in all circumstances. This rigid adherence makes for a difficult relationship between these 2 brothers. Chuck is the kind of guy who does all the right things for all the wrong reasons. He is intent that people should follow the rules, yet he is not opposed to manipulating those rules in ways that are all perfectly legal in order to gain advantage for himself or to punish others, going to great lengths to use the rules to undermine and sabotage those he feels deserve it. Jimmy, on the other hand, is a person who does all the wrong things, but for all the right reasons. He breaks all kinds of rules all the time, but always with the most noble intentions out of a desire for justice in the big picture, for those who are most often oppressed and victimized by the system. The conflict between these two brothers echoes the central struggle of our text this morning. Which is better? To follow all the rules and yet not have consideration for the well-being of those around you, or to care deeply for others, even if it means you have to utterly disregard the rules that govern civil society? This is the question that Jesus invites the lawyer and the rest of the gathered crowd to wrestle with as he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. In fact, it is the struggle at the heart of Jesus' teachings throughout the gospel. At its foundation, the struggle is between two kinds of wisdom: conventional wisdom and alternative wisdom. Conventional wisdom is the common sense wisdom of the culture. It is the air that we all breathe, all the things we internalize about human nature and how the world works based on the time and the place and the people we are raised around. Jesus understood this language of conventional wisdom in the context of his community. And as we noted last week, Jesus was, among other things, a great storyteller and teacher. He was a master of the established rhetorical forms, compelling in his storytelling, quick with a snappy one-liner, and he knew how to speak thoughtfully and provocatively to elites and common people alike. But unlike teachers of his time and place, Jesus used rhetoric and wisdom not to uphold the cultural norms, but to turn conventional wisdom on its head. That is to say, Jesus used the conventions of conventional wisdom, but with a radical twist. He would take familiar characters and familiar situations and reverse the roles, or put two seemingly incongruous things in conversation with one another, upending the conventional ways of seeing and inviting all those who would hear into a new way of seeing things, inviting them into an alternative way of living. We see this skill on full display in the parables, and in today's text in particular. Jesus told this story in a time when the answer to the question, "Who is my neighbor?" was highly defined, and in a place where clear lines were drawn between those who were worthy of love and those who were not. Into this world, Jesus tells the story of a dead man. Or maybe he was just mostly dead. We don't know at first, but the possibility of death made this man's whole situation beyond the bounds of most observant Jews, no matter how much they might want to help him. And even more so for those of the priestly and Levite classes. To even go near a dead body would make one unspeakably unclean. This was a risk a priest or a Levite could not afford to take. After all, there are rules about these sorts of things. Enter the Samaritan man, a foreigner to begin with, which makes him automatically an outsider and therefore impure. Then he was a Samaritan, a culture that to first-century Palestinians was about as unclean as they come. In what probably seemed to the crowd like a bizarre turn of events, this impure outsider becomes the hero of this story. Not by following the rules. He didn't even exist within the framework of the rules, but because he showed compassion. He chose to act out of love, despite his outsider status, despite the fact that the man who he was helping might have even refused his help had he been in any sort of state to object. This is the most important rule, Jesus tells us. This is the way of God. Jesus points to the way of God as the way of the heart, loving, generous, open to all, not because of anything we have done or not done, not because we are clean or unclean, but because God is the source of all love and mercy. God longs in every moment to be one with us in this love, for each of us to open our eyes and our hearts to God's presence in the here and now. Marcus Borg calls this the way less traveled. In contrast to the broad, well-traveled way of the world, with its rules and its hierarchies, the way of the heart invites us to orient our lives toward compassion for others and for ourselves. This is a revolutionary move, the kind of thing that made no sense to the people who heard him, and the kind of thing that makes no sense in the context of the broader world in which we live. It makes perfect sense, however, in a life that has been transformed by radical encounter and deep relationship with God. This is why we see Jesus repeatedly lift up the importance of relationship. It is in the midst of relationship, both divine and human, that we discover the way of the heart. Micah J. Murray, is a Christian blogger. He writes about the life of faith, and especially about his own journey from conventional Christian wisdom to the way of the heart, from boundaries and rules toward compassion. In 2013, he wrote a groundbreaking article on LGBTQ inclusion entitled, "Why I Can No Longer Say, Love the Sinner, But Hate the Sin." This article was written in response to an encounter he had with an acquaintance, a fellow Christian, who had fought an inner war for years between his identity as a Christian man and his identity as a gay man. Michael tells the story in the first person, so that is how I will share it with you today. Before I even read between the lines, I know what you are really saying. Angry, struggling, confused, alone. We had been friends for a while, in the very loose sense that people our age use that word, friends. We passed each other from time to time on the internet. We had never met in real life. But you wanted to know if you could talk to me. Pacing in my backyard with the phone pressed against my ear, the first time I heard your voice, you were saying, "I'm gay." I had already told you that I wouldn't have any answers, no easy fixes for how to reconcile being gay and being a Christian. So I listened. And then I was angry. I was angry that you had to call me a stranger from the internet. I was angry that everyone in your life that should have been there to listen face to face across the table from you. I was angry at your parents, your Christian friends, your church, for abandoning you in the shadows, for pushing you away, for condemning people like you so many times that you couldn't even speak. I had already told you that I wouldn't have any answers, so I just listened. That was all I had to offer. I listened as you talked about living your teen years so desperately dedicated to loving and serving the church. I listened as you told me about leading Bible studies in college. I listened as you recounted your deep desire to save yourself for the wife you prayed God would bring you one day. And then I realized you were just like me. Just like me. In that moment, I realized the arrogance of my own system, how quickly my mind raced to draw a circle in the sand around myself with you on the outside, how naturally the word them rolled off my tongue when I spoke of you and to you. And then I was angry at myself. The next day, I sat down and I wrote, "I am done saying love the sinner and hate the sin. I am done with speaking as if I am different and better than you." In that moment, the debate around inclusion in the church stopped being political and started being personal. It had a name and a face, your name your face. And if you are reading this today, I want you to know 3 things. I am sorry I drew the circle in the sand with you outside. I was wrong. I am grateful that you were brave enough to tell me your story. And I love you, not as a sinner, but as a brother. I love you as a friend. Amen.